Hello and welcome back to the history of Georgian art. Today I'm going to talk to you about painting, church wall paintings in Georgian churches, which occupies a rather large and significant part in the history of Georgian art. Generally, painting has not just an artistic value in Orthodox theology, but it's intrinsically theological. Most of you probably know that in Byzantine theology, after iconoclasm, the dogma of incarnation was closely related to the idea of venerating icons and iconography. So you can't really be Orthodox if you cannot venerate icons and if you do not acknowledge the theological meaning and role of paintings in the church. However, in Georgian paintings, well, today we're not talking about iconography as such. We are going to discuss wall painting, but in the future, I promise there will be a session about icons and also metalwork goldsmiths separately. Today I'm going to talk to you about wall paintings in Georgian churches which are heavily influenced by Byzantine artistic tradition, yet Georgian masters still managed to develop their own unique style and some kind of flavor unique to Georgian nature. The earliest examples that we have and we kind of can trace back date to the as early as 5th century, probably, and they are obviously influenced by Byzantine and Roman tradition. Now, for example, one of the earliest examples, which is not quite wall painting, it's more like a mosaic floor in Bidrita Church. As you can see here, it has some animal motifs. You can see deers there, maybe even a hunting scene, which is very typical, characteristic for Byzantine palaces, let's say. And it probably is kind of has some symbolic meaning. But unfortunately, most of the examples from the early stage, are not well preserved. And this is one of the examples which we can see, but it is in present-day Abkhazia. So it's not quite on the territory of the Georgian boundaries. Well, it still is, but it's occupied at the moment. There is another example, which is a flourished cross depicted on the wall in Adenisioni, but it's an earlier painting, and it's different from the main painting in Adenisioni, which we are going to see later. So these are the early examples. There is a kind of gap between this early time and the later time, which begins from the 10th century. We don't know whether there was some kind of iconoclastic wave in Georgia or not. Most scholars believe that there was no such thing in Georgia as iconoclasm, and some of the scholars even insist that when iconoclasm was taking over Byzantium, maybe iconodule painters were flooding to Georgia to find a refugee and shelter here. We don't know that for sure. There can be no evidence and it cannot be proved, but it is a possibility. Now, for example, some of the scholars believe that the David Gareja frescoes, well, there are different layers in David Gareja monastic complex, and different churches there are painted at different times. Some people believe that this, here, this fresco of the Last Supper, for example, it can be dated to the 11th century, but some people believe that it has to be dated as early as 6th or 7th or 8th centuries. Now, you can see how heavily damaged it is. Most of the wall paintings in Georgia have been damaged by various things. Well, one of the thing was Russian exarchate whitewashing churches, but here it's not the case. It's obviously vandalized by various people, including Russian soldiers who were standing at this place, at Davidgareja place, because it's at the border of Georgia and Azerbaijan, and it was controlled by Soviet military in the past. So there are lots of Russian writings kind of cut into these wall paintings, which is very sad. But some of them are vandalized by some other people who obviously failed to understand the beauty and historical significance of these frescoes. Now, when you look at it, it's so badly damaged that it's very even difficult to talk about color palette, what it really was like, because as you see here, these clothes that they are wearing, these, especially these bluish bits, are so washed down, you can't even be sure whether it's blue or dark blue or what kind of color it was. But some of the colors you see are mainly earth colors. Now the figures are sitting around this table, and these are 12 apostles at the Last Supper, and the table is strangely enough, not strangely enough, but it's quite typical for iconography. It wants to show you what is laid on the table, so it's kind of almost turned not upside down, but turned in a frontal kind of view so that you could see the figures of the apostles and of Jesus. And you see Apostle John is leaning on to his shoulder, to his chest rather. The movements between them are so natural, you almost feel like they are talking to each other, they are addressing each other so naturally. Yet at the same time, there is some kind of sense of immaterialism. The way these their bodies are built, it's almost like they are very light, kind of presented in a very light manner. Some of the other frescoes in Davidgareji have developed this notion even further, so much that you can't even think that they are floating in air. Unfortunately, I don't have those other ones. But the sense of immaterial is very, very important here. Now, the other painting of the 11th century, which is my absolute favorite, is Atenistioni wall paintings. Here you can see Archangel Gabriel from the scene of Annunciation. The way Archangel is depicted here is rather moving. He's depicting on a neutral background, even though most of the parts here are damaged again, but you can still be sure that the background is rather neutral. It's quite kind of whitish. You can see the lines of his arm, under his arm, the lines of his clothes are almost repeating, or not repeating, but kind of following one another, which increases the sense of dynamism. And the clothes, his mantle floating behind. There is so much movement. You can't even be reminded of Hellenistic sculpture, except that the sculpturalness of this painting is not really kind of giving you a kind of heavy feeling, but it's more kind of giving it a monumental feeling. The other thing about this figure is that if you notice here, the hand, well, the proportions of the figure are quite lifelike, are quite natural, except the hand. You can see that the hand is a bit enlarged, which is done on purpose, of course, because it's a blessing hand. It's a hand which is blessing it. It's kind of main thing in the composition of almost. So the artist had to do something about it. So some kind of emphasize it. All this movement, which is taking the figure towards the other figure, which is not here, the main one, which is the Mother of God, of course, the whole thing is so life kind of filled with the sense of life, so narrating, so kind of moving. And the color palette also is very light. It's kind of pale colors used for this painting are almost pastel, let's say, colors. That's what it can remind you. The other paintings of the same time, well, I forgot to tell you that in this Atenisioni church, the whole system, the structure of painting, it's rather interesting because usually the system in Byzantine, let's say, painting has rather kind of very strict, organized kind of manner. But here, artists decided to bring in some apocryphal literature, let's say, apocryphal stories, which is quite unusual for either Byzantine or any other Christian, well, any other countries to include them. Now, the other one I want to show you is from Svanetia, or Svaneti, let's say. It's Iprali Church, and as we know from inscriptions here, these paintings were made by an artist, Tevdore, or Theodore, who was almost a private painter of the King David IV, who was known as David the Builder or David the Restorer, the strongest king in the history of Georgia, who united the country and threw out the enemies and made the country strong and powerful. So wall paintings of the time period of from 11th century to the 13th century is just as great and majestic as the ones in as they are Georgian architecture of the same time, because it kind of reflects what the country was like that time. Now here, this painting is, as we know it, the first attempt of Tevdore, the painter, Theodore. So if you notice, there is some kind of static and frontal and kind of a bit still representation, not much movement. It's kind of standing, almost rigid expression, not in a bad way. I don't mean it in a bad way. Which actually gives it a rather monumental look. But if you look closer, this drapery of clothes these people are wearing that is where you can find some movement and even the feel of texture. So the artist here is, at the same time, he wants to show the strong face of Svanetians. Well, it is what it reflects, because Svanetians have a very strict and, well, let's say almost rigid kind of faith. Not in a bad way again, you know, but at the same time, he also wants to develop some kind of movement and dynamism and freedom here, for which he uses this drapery, obviously, and these lines, kind of little teeny tiny lines, not of the circular kind of movements. Next one, not next one, but the other one, let's say, by the same artist, same Tevdore, here. Let's look at this. Nagi Pari church in Svaneti again. Here he also already develops more dramatism, let's say, in expression and expressiveness. Saint Theodore, whose iconography is quite similar to the one of St. George's, as you notice here, he's killing the dragon here. And if you look at the dragon, he's roaring almost and looking up. Some kind of expression is going on, apart from the movement that is taking place here. Well, the colors are quite much kind of darker here, except that you should not think that they are using any black. No, as you know, probably iconography does not use black color. It's a dark blue, the background. But it also kind of shows this Svanetian strictness of Svanetian character, let's say. Sorry. Now the other absolutely stunning example of the same age but the different century. This is 12th century Gelati frescoes, Gelati paintings. These are paintings here. Well, here you can see the mosaics on the other side. This church, actually, Gelati complex, has mosaics as well as wall paintings, and they are absolutely stunning and marvelous. Now here, on this wall painting, you see the faces of church fathers, the ecumenical council. It's quite difficult actually to identify who is who here, but I think I kind of know who they are, but I better not try it this time. But the main thing you can notice is this expression, amazing expression on their faces. These people are theologians. They are gathered at ecumenical council. They have to discuss theological things there. They are thinking, and this thinking expression, these faces are absolutely wonderfully express this kind of attitude, let's say. Apart from this fantastic execution, and these lines are very moving, very dynamic, very flowing. Now the other one, which is also kind of presenting this golden era or golden age of Georgia, which is sometimes even called as Georgian Renaissance. This is made in the time of Queen Tamar. It's Vardia. Vardia was well, it still is, an ancient city, and it's all in caves carved in a rock, huge massive rock, and there are lots of caves, and it used to be a city in the time of Tamar, Queen Tamar, and that's where she lived too. So that Vardia complex, living complex, had a church which was painted with these beautiful, wonderful, amazing frescoes. Here you see Queen Tamar together with her father, King George III, and they are addressing the Mother of God. And Queen Tamar is holding the model of Vardia, which is obvious, I mean, which is probably the symbol of Georgia. And she's entrusting it to the Mother of God. The colors here are more kind of contrast, kind of based on contrasts. And the shapes and forms are more kind of outlined with lines and more kind of decorative, more adorned with decorations. Well, because it kind of expresses the majesty of her queen's kind of Tamar, Queen Tamar, that I'm named after, and I'm very proud of that. She was one of the most powerful and strongest monarchs in Georgian history, just like after her grandfather, who was King David IV. So many victories that we had in our history we owe to Queen Tamar and King David. So this painting obviously kind of celebrates the majesty of Tamar's reign. Now the other one I want to show you is David Gareja Monastery again, but it's kind of a later period here. It's dated to the 13th century. It's Bertubani. Again, you can see it's quite damaged, it's heavily damaged, and you can also see that Gareja Monastery was also carved in a rock. And it's all a kind of, this whole monastic complex is located, is situated in caves, in a rock. I mean, it's like Vardia, but except that Vardia was a living complex and this is a monastic one. Now, the one I want to show you in Clint, sorry, yes, Clint is, sorry, that's the other one I need to show you here. Clint Monastery, which has marvelous paintings, absolutely wonderful. The most popular and most famous one is this angel, Clint angel. This is an angel of resurrection. It's sitting on the tomb of Christ and it's telling people that he's no longer here, he has risen from the dead. And it is, this painting is located between openings of windows, and it's very interestingly located. Unfortunately, I can't really show it to you. But apart from that, colors grab your attention. The first thing. Well, the first thing is that it's quite huge. It's very, very large. This big, massive figure is looking at you from the wall when you enter the church. And it's very powerful and very kind of impressive experience. But other than that, these colors that you see, it's quite characteristic for Georgian wall painting. The use of lapis lazuli for sky. But here also the angel is wearing the clothes which is almost merging with the sky because of the color. What has been said about this painting is that because the figure is quite massive and quite, let's say, almost three-dimensional, not yet, but it's kind of heading towards that, there are some kind of humanistic elements shining through these Intvisi church paintings. Because actually earthly beauty here is celebrated. Yes, it is an angel, but it also looks very human here. Much more human than the one in Atenisioni did. It's almost like a human being, which is celebrated because it's beautiful. It's not quite the same thing as the Italian Renaissance, of course. You should not think that I'm kind of implying to the same concept of humanism. No, not like that. No, really. Okay, let's go back to this book because now I want to show you a bit later development, which takes us to a kind of absolutely different understanding of volume and three-dimensional and light and everything. Even include when you look at it, you feel like something really dramatic is going on here. And it's not because of the composition alone, but it's also because of the way figures are expressed and depicted. Now, here in the 14th century, painter Damiani decided to paint in a slightly kind of Paleologan style, which makes figures look more three-dimensional, more kind of sculptural, more dramatic. You can see even this white kind of lighted little kind of parts of the body are so sharp and so kind of standing out. So from flat presentation, like we had one in Svanetti, now we see this very sculptural, very kind of heavily volumized, let's say as it were, figures of saints. Very lifelike. Even the plants and natural parts, natural kind of parts of nature are presented in a more lifelike and realistic style. Okay, a bit later, in 16th century, where is it? Here. Let's go to this Bugeuli church, which is a bit, it does look a bit different, doesn't it? It looks more kind of, there are more outlines. Expressions are kind of more naive, more like almost to, you know, children's like painting, something like that. But the thing is that in this time, folk elements infiltrate Georgian painting, and I think if you look at this painting of sponsors of the church, this is a family, noble family, who decided to build this church, and they are painted here, depicted here. It's not just the folklore which infiltrates this painting, but it's also some kind of Islamic influence, I think. Even the way they are dressed, even the way their faces are depicted. I think there is some kind of, well, usually in this time, after 13th century, the Islamic influences are quite obvious in both in painting and in architecture. In this time, later time, in the 16th century, more things are restored and recovered. Like, for example, Athenisioni paintings were repainted or restored many times, or the other things were done, were kind of recovered that was created earlier. But at the same time, new things were painted too. Like, for example, here, if you look in this corner, Shota Rustavelli, who was a great epic writer or poet, let's say, of the 12th century, and he was a great admirer of Queen Tamar too. His fresco was painted at the Monastery of the Holy Cross in Jerusalem. And now it's turned into a kind of tourist site almost every time when Georgians go to Jerusalem and visit the Monastery of the Holy Cross. They almost always go there and take a photo at this painting. Well, I have done that once too. But as you see, there is some kind of, well, this kind of Persian influence may not be accidental here, because if you have read the poem written by Shuta Rustaveli, The Knight in the Panther Skin, that also has some Persian influence too. Very interestingly kind of adapted and adjusted to Georgian reality, but still. Now, this is basically the ancient or medieval Georgian wall painting, but at the efforts of His Holiness Catholicos Patriarch of Georgia, the tradition of wall painting has been recovered in the 20th century. The Patriarch decided to invite or encourage, let's say, icon painters, and also to allow them to paint churches all over Georgia, especially the new ones. So I can show you some of the examples, the best ones probably, which we have happening now. Well, I wouldn't say that they are, as moving, as dynamic, and as lively as the earlier ones were, but we're trying, and there is a hope that a new style will develop and Georgian masters will find some kind of expression unique to modernity, way of expressing the message of the gospel in a kind of unique and different way at some point. But at the moment, it's kind of about recovering the old tradition and copying the old and imitating, not exactly copying, but more like imitating. So this is what I wanted to tell you today about this tradition of Georgian wall painting. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and like it. Thank you. Bye for now.